It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon at my new home in Maple Grove Estates. The smell of grilled burgers and sizzling vegetables filled the air. The sun shining down on our backyard. My family was gathered together, laughing and sharing stories. After weeks of stress and work, this barbecue was the perfect chance to reconnect with my loved ones. My sister, Sarah, was chasing my nieces around with water guns while my dad, Judge Richard Harrison, sat back in a lounge chair, enjoying the rare moment of peace. But the calm was short-lived. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway interrupted our laughter. A black SUV slowly rolled to a stop near the curb, and out stepped a woman in her 50s with sharp features, impeccably styled blonde hair, and a clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. I immediately recognized her as Karen Williams, the HOA president. Someone who had already made waves in the neighborhood with her strict enforcement of community rules. "Excuse me," Karen called out as she marched toward our backyard. "Is this your event, Mr. Harrison?" Her voice was stern, cutting through the festive atmosphere like a knife. I turned to face her, spatula in hand. "Yes. Just a family barbecue. Is there a problem?" Karen glanced at the crowd, eyes narrowing. "According to our HOA guidelines, any event involving more than 10 people must be registered and approved in advance. I'm afraid you didn't follow the proper procedure." I laughed, thinking she was joking. "Are you serious? A barbecue needs approval." "It does now," she replied with a cold smile, scribbling something on her clipboard. "You're being fined $179 for violating our event rules. You didn't register. This gathering is required." The laughter around me slowly stopped, and a tense silence fell over the backyard. My dad, still sitting calmly in his chair, set his drink down and stood up. "Karen," he said, his voice steady, "I think you're mistaken. We didn't sign up for this when we moved in. There's no mention of needing permission for a family barbecue." Karen's face tightened. "The rules are clear, Judge Harrison," she said, her gaze now fixed on my father. "You should know better than anyone that rules are rules." The tension in the backyard was palpable. My dad, Judge Richard Harrison, was now standing tall, his calm demeanor providing a sharp contrast to Karen's aggressive tone. As she stood there with her clipboard, still clutching the fine like it was a badge of honor, my heart began to race. This wasn't just an HOA president enforcing rules, it felt personal. "Karen, you're saying I need permission to have my family over for a barbecue?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've lived here for only a few weeks, and nobody mentioned this rule." She didn't flinch. "The rules are clear, Mr. Harrison. I'm just doing my job." But my father, ever the calm force, stepped forward. "I think, Karen, you've misunderstood the law here," he said, his voice firm but composed. He was still dressed in his relaxed weekend clothes, but his presence was commanding. "As a federal judge, I've reviewed the HOA guidelines, and there's no legal requirement for residents to seek permission for a private family gathering. Now, I'll ask you again, are you sure this fine is legitimate?" Karen's face twisted with a mix of confusion and irritation. "Judge Harrison, I understand your position, but this is about maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood. Our rules apply to everyone. No exceptions." Dad took a step closer, his tone calm but with a hint of authority. "Karen," he said, "your rules may apply to common areas, but this is private property. You cannot impose fines for something that's not legally binding. The fine you're issuing is, quite frankly, without legal standing." Karen's grip on her clipboard tightened. She opened her mouth to argue, but Dad raised his hand, silencing her. "I suggest you take a moment to review the HOA bylaws, and you'll find that what you're trying to do here is not only unreasonable but legally unenforceable." Her eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of doubt. "I don't think you understand how things work around here, Judge. The board sets the rules, and they must be followed. There are no exceptions. Rules that are not properly documented or approved. Dad countered. His voice cool and measured. And rules that, when overstepped, can be challenged in a court of law. Karen hesitated. The smirk that had been on her face began to fade as she realized the depth of the situation. She turned to leave. But not without one last glare. "I'll report this to the board," she muttered. Before walking back to her SUV. My heart was still pounding. But the victory felt sweet. Dad's calm, collected response had diffused a potentially explosive situation. As he sat back down, he glanced at me, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "You're going to want to read the HOA's full covenant," he said. "There are more cracks in it than you think." The following morning, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the fine notice that Karen had left me. $179 for a barbecue that had nothing more than a few dozen people, none of whom were loud or disruptive. It didn't make sense. I glanced over at Dad, who was sipping his coffee with a thoughtful look on his face. "This doesn't add up," I said, tapping the fine on the table. "We need to look deeper into these HOA rules." Dad nodded slowly. "I agree. This isn't just about a barbecue anymore. There's something off about how Karen's been running things around here." We spent the rest of the morning digging through the HOA's covenant and bylaws. The document was long, so long, in fact, that it was easy to skim over certain sections. But as I started to dig deeper, I noticed something strange. There were several sections, particularly the ones dealing with community events and visitor regulations, that seemed vague and inconsistently worded. They were more like guidelines than enforceable laws. Dad ran his finger over a clause that seemed particularly questionable. "Here," he said, pointing at the paper. "This section about visitor approval, it's too broad. It doesn't define what constitutes a gathering or how many people require registration. It leaves too much room for interpretation." I raised an eyebrow. "So she could literally make up rules as she goes along?" "Exactly," Dad said. "That's the danger. When there's ambiguity in the rules, people like Karen can exploit it to control others." He paused, flipping through more pages. "And look at this," he muttered, finding another section. "This bylaw regarding fines is just as problematic. The board is supposed to vote on any fines over $100. But there's no record of them voting on this fine." I stared at him, stunned. "You mean she's just been issuing fines without any oversight?" Dad's eyes narrowed. "I believe so. And what's worse, she's using her position to bully people into compliance, all while abusing her power for personal gain." We spent the rest of the day going over more bylaws, cross-referencing them with county regulations. The more we looked, the clearer it became that Karen had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom. By the time the sun began to set, we had uncovered several glaring violations. The board members hadn't properly filed their bylaws with the county. Some had connections with businesses that received questionable contracts. And Karen had been selectively enforcing rules based on personal vendettas. Dad folded the documents carefully and looked at me. "This isn't just a case of a bad neighbor enforcing petty rules. This is serious abuse of power." "Now what?" I asked, a sense of determination filling me. "Now we fight back," Dad said, his voice resolute. "We've got the evidence we need. It's time to take this to the proper authorities." The evening after we had uncovered the full extent of the HOA's violations, Dad's face was serious as he made a call to a colleague in the county's legal department. "I need to speak with someone in charge of HOA oversight," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "It's about a local homeowners association, and I believe there are several legal issues that need immediate attention." I watched him as he leaned back in his chair, waiting for a response. Dad had a way of getting straight to the point, no unnecessary small talk, just facts. Within minutes, he had arranged a meeting with the county's Housing and Zoning Commission, a group responsible for investigating complaints about HOAs. As he hung up the phone, he turned to me. "We have the evidence we need. The county is going to look into Karen's financial dealings and the way they've been running things. The next day, I sat beside Dad as we drove to the county offices. My nerves were buzzing with anticipation. This was no longer just about a fine, it was about holding an entire HOA accountable for their illegal actions. We met with the county investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Linda Graham, who immediately recognized the seriousness of our findings. "Thorough work, Judge Harrison," she said, flipping through the documents we had presented. "You're right, Karen and her board members have been operating outside the law. The financial discrepancies are troubling, to say the least." Dad nodded. "I have reason to believe that Karen and her team have been issuing fines, enforcing rules arbitrarily, and using their positions for personal gain. We've also found evidence that they've been taking kickbacks from local businesses." Detective Graham raised an eyebrow, her gaze narrowing. "I'm going to need a full audit of their financials. And I'll subpoena all records relating to the HOA's activities. If what you're saying is true, this could be much bigger than just a few violations." The next few days were a whirlwind. Detective Graham and her team launched a full investigation into the Willow Creek Estates HOA. They interviewed several residents who had been harassed or unfairly fined. And as they delved deeper into the board's financials, more troubling details began to surface. It turned out that not only had Karen been signing off on questionable fines, but she had also been approving contracts for companies that were either owned by board members or had close ties to them. The community pool fund that had been mysteriously drained? It led straight to one of Karen's personal business associates. "She's been running this HOA like a private cash cow," Dad remarked as he reviewed more of the findings. "This isn't just an abuse of power anymore. This is financial fraud." I could see the determination in Dad's eyes. "So what's the next step?" "We let the authorities do their work," he replied. "But now that we've got the evidence, it's only a matter of time before Karen and her board members are held accountable. They've crossed a line, and they'll pay for it." The investigation was just beginning, but I felt a glimmer of hope. We weren't just fighting for a barbecue anymore, we were fighting to restore fairness and transparency to a community that had been under Karen's control for far too long. The tension in Willow Creek Estates reached a boiling point as the investigation into Karen's actions unfolded. For weeks, I had watched the community grow increasingly frustrated with her authoritarian rule. But after the county's legal team had finished their audit, the full extent of Karen's corruption came to light. The financial discrepancies, the illegal contracts, and the personal vendettas against residents were too much to ignore. The moment of reckoning had finally arrived. It was a Thursday morning when I received the news: Karen was being removed from her position as president of the HOA. Effective immediately, the county had filed formal charges against her and several other board members for misconduct, financial fraud, and abuse of power. The entire board had been disbanded, and new elections would be held to select a more transparent, accountable team. Karen, once so confident in her control, had lost everything. I sat in the living room, staring at the email, a sense of relief washing over me. Dad looked up from his newspaper with a small smile. "It's over, Jake," he said quietly. "She's finally out of power." But the battle wasn't just about Karen's removal. It was about restoring the community, about making sure that what had happened under her rule never happened again. The county had also ordered the HOA to reimburse all families for the fines they had wrongfully imposed, including the $179 fine they had slapped on my family for the barbecue. The money would be refunded, and all outstanding violations were nullified. The changes came quickly. A new board was elected, one that promised to be fair, reasonable, and most importantly, transparent. The bylaws were rewritten, clear and straightforward, with provisions to prevent future abuses. The HOA's financial records were opened up to all residents, and the community began to breathe a sigh of relief. As for Karen, she tried to fight back in court, claiming that the charges were politically motivated. But it was clear to everyone that she was grasping at straws. Her connections crumbled, and the legal battles became a formality. Within months, she had lost her position, her influence, and her credibility. The neighborhood finally felt free from her iron grip. On a sunny afternoon, not long after the changes took place, I found myself back in my backyard. This time without any fear of being fined. The sound of laughter and sizzling food filled the air once again. My family was gathered, just like that first barbecue. But this time, there were no interruptions. There were no threats of fines or regulations hanging over us. The neighbors were out, too. Some came over to chat. Others simply waved from their yards. "Well, Jake," Dad said, raising his glass in a small toast. "Sometimes standing up for what's right really does make a difference." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. "I guess rules are rules," I said. "But the most important rule is that nobody is above the law. Not even Karen." As the evening sun set over Willow Creek Estates, I knew that this was a community that was truly free, free from oppression, free from fear, and finally, free from Karen's tyranny. The victory wasn't just ours, it was for everyone who had been silently suffering under her rule. The community had changed. And it had changed for the better. What do you think of this story? Do you believe standing up to injustice can truly change a community? Or do you think the system is too powerful to be challenged? I'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'll be sharing more stories about the wild, intense battles between homeowners and their HOA. And trust me, you won't want to miss out. Hit that notification bell so you're the first to know when a new video drops. Thanks for watching. And as always, stay tuned for more drama and real-life lessons in every story.